Thanks for taking the time
Yes.
to speak with us. Starting off with news that happened today. Governor Greg Abbott from Texas said that he claimed that they are busing up to a quarter of the migrants who've arrived in Denver. What would you like him to know about the impact that that's had on Denver?
Yeah, I think it's creating a humanitarian crisis that is not in the best interest of those asylum seekers or of the country. We think there's a reasonable, thoughtful way to do this. You look at the way we've welcomed refugees from Afghanistan or from Ukraine. We've worked together as a country, integrated people, found them work, and found them places to stay. And I've reached out to Governor Abbott. I think we'd be happy to be a partner in this. I understand that Texas doesn't have to carry all of the weight of this, but there's a way for us to work together as a country that's not just him surprising us with 7 buses in the middle of the night on Thanksgiving evening and freezing cold, which is what happened last week.
Do you think he'll listen?
I don't know. I don't know him, so I don't have a relationship. I'm always open to the idea that we can get people to work together and get hard problems solved, so I'd be happy to work together if he's open to it.
At this point, the migrant situation and the homelessness situation in Denver are kind of tied hand in hand. The policies that we've created in Denver, that you've created as mayor, are leading to migrants coming to Denver and then being on the streets in homeless encampments weeks after they arrive, if not days after they arrive. Are they afforded the same ability to get housing as homeless people who didn't arrive as migrants?
Yeah, so I think we have struck a middle ground here on this that other cities have not. There are many cities that don't do any sheltering at all, won't put you up for a single night. If you arrive, you're homeless the day you arrive. And as you know, many people that arrived in Denver never intended to come to Denver. They got put on a bus by Governor Abbott and they wanted to go to Chicago where they had family, or Boston. And so Sure. We do provide onward travel so they can get to the places where their networks are. And we provide a length of shelter to be able to try to get them a chance to stabilize, find housing, find work, get assimilated. And so that's why we have this balance where we have 14 days for individuals. We were at 37 days for families, because that's the amount of time often it takes to be able to get yourself situated and get access to services. And we also know we can't keep them in housing in perpetuity. We have other cities like New York that are doing that. I think they're going to spend $7 billion next year to do that. So, and we know we have other families that are here previous to our newcomers that also have those challenges, and so we need to have a sense of equity in how we respond. But we are giving them chances to get mobilized, get stabilized, and then get connected to services, and that's why we have the timeline.
So help me understand this. There's a homeless camp filled with migrants that I know you've visited off of Zuni Street. Let me ask you a couple questions. Sure. Will you sweep that camp full of migrants? Many of the folks there, I visited with those individuals multiple times. Most of them have come through the city, have been in one of our shelter sites, have been there for a length of time, and are now working on getting jobs and getting access to units. Many of those folks have apartments they're working on leasing. They have long-term housing plans. We're supporting them getting access to that. The biggest challenge for every one of these individuals is just the ability to work. Every single person says the same thing to me. I don't need charity, I don't need support, I just want to be able to work. And so our real focus is on getting them access to work opportunities so they can pay for their own housing, and they agree they want the same thing. So that's our priority. But let's talk about housing for right now, because there are families, including children, that are living on the streets that are migrants. Do they have the same opportunity to get housing as people who didn't arrive here as migrants?
So right now we do have a urgent priority for families when we don't want to have kids on the streets in tents in 20-degree weather in the city, and so we have focused on bringing all those families inside that we can identify, whether they were migrant arrivals or whether they are existing family arrivals. We want them they're in either our housing system or our shelter system, and so we have prioritized getting families off the streets into housing. But we also know we can't make a permanent commitment of housing for anyone in perpetuity, whether they were unhoused before this crisis or whether they're migrants after. And so even for the housing effort we're doing on people that are unhoused, it's around getting you into transitional housing so you can get stabilized, you can get support, you can get a job, then you can pay for your own units and be up and independent. And so that same trajectory applies to both populations, but they have, as you know, very different histories and very different backgrounds, very different needs.
Are those migrants eligible for the new shelters that the city has acquired through the House 1000 project?
We've not prioritized them in that housing unit because many of the needs are different. I think when we have people that are the migrants that have arrived, they generally need 2 things. They'll need housing, they'll need workforce, and they usually need a very much shorter term stay to be able to get access to those things. So we have a separate set of transitional shelters or hotel units we've used for people that are migrants. If we have people that are on the streets and are in encampments and we're trying to get them housed, we're not going to discriminate against people based on their arrival origin. We're going to try to get everyone off the streets into housing.
It's not like you're saying that migrants are not eligible for the House 1000 shelters.
Correct. No one's prohibited from getting access to shelter. We want everyone off the streets and into shelter and housing.
Do you have enough shelter for the migrants that are arriving?
I mean, right now we've been expanding our hotel capacity. We have now 5 different hotels across the region that are helping house migrants when they arrive for that length of stay. The key is getting them to long-term housing. We're working to bring on some more sites. But yeah, when I started, we were at 400 people in shelter the night I got here. As of a few weeks ago, we were over 3,000, and so that's almost 10 times the demand we had just a few months ago. And so that was why I went to DC and worked with a group of 5 or 6 other mayors to press the federal government on, yes, we need more resources, but what we really need is work authorization. We need people when they arrive to Denver to be able to work. If they can work, they can support themselves, and that's what they want to do.
Is the House 1,000 goal to house 1,000 people by the end of this year, is that still a realistic goal for you?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. We stay really focused on what we think are transformational outcomes. And for us, it's not a game. It's not like you get a gold star if you get to 1,001 and you lose if you get 999. We know it is about people's lives who are at risk. You and I both saw 4 people who died outside on the streets of the city over the Thanksgiving weekend. None of us wants to see that happen again. And so that's the urgency for us, is to bring on these units as fast as possible. And even if we succeed at getting 1,000 into housing, that won't be the end. That's not mission accomplished. We still have more people to serve and more work to do in the next year. But this is a really ambitious goal that no city's taken on and delivered, and we want to stay at it to succeed.
I think the people of Denver will understand if you hit 999 and don't hit 1,000, that they won't see that as a failure. You have outlined pretty obviously, since the beginning of your campaign, what success looks like. What does a failure in this look like?
I don't know that there's really I think we've already passed the threshold of not failing. Failure would have been our team not working hard enough, or the city not coming together around it, or us not being able to marshal the resources in the team to deliver. All that is already in place. We have access to the sites. We've worked with communities. We have the people who have needs identified. All of the core pieces are in place. What's left now is the blocking and tackling of getting the right units open on the right day and the right person transitioned in, and that's all critically important. But I would say, in my mind, we've already succeeded at setting a sense of urgency and building the infrastructure to be able to deliver the 1,000 units. Now it's all a matter of matching and placing people into each of those units in the next 30 days, and we'll stay at that well after January 1st has come.
There are some people who would walk down streets in Denver where there are still homeless encampments that are spilling out from the sidewalks and say, this isn't what success looks like to me.
Oh, we're definitely not at success right now. What we know right now is exactly the current reality is still we have accessed most of those what will be 1,000 units. They're not open yet, and so I share that belief. We are not at all at success right now. We have people outside in tents in downtown Denver. That's what we don't want to have anymore. So really, success for us is that you could, walk from 5 Points to Union Station to Ball Arena to the City and County Building to the Art Museum, and you wouldn't see anybody that has to sleep on the streets. And all those folks would be in housing, getting a job, getting supports, and getting their lives back together. That's what's success for us.
Is it harder than you thought?
It is. There are definitely ways in which it is, and in ways you don't always anticipate. Things like getting the electrical siting access to a micro community for tiny homes, or being able to get clearance on permitting for the fence to be able to stand up to get that built. All the things that people find when they're doing their own work in Denver. It's been a great lesson for us on how our own systems that are well-intended sometimes can slow us down, but we've got a really amazing team of people in the city who are saying, we have a meeting we call the barrier busting meeting every day, which is just, what are the barriers that are there? How can we try to break through them or work around them? And I think the city employees have been incredible in the way they've risen to the occasion to say, all right, it seems like an impossible dream, but let's actually think what we can do to make it possible.
What about the backlash that you've received from neighborhoods? You were at a meeting yesterday evening where it was heated, in which people were saying, we don't want these shelters in our neighborhood. Did you expect that?
I did. I mean, if you remember from some of these debates years ago, I think it took maybe 3 years for Denver to cite its first individual site of a tiny home community like this, and that was an epic battle to cite 40 units. In 3 years, we're trying to cite 1,000 units in 120 days. We knew that would be a challenge, and I totally understand that feedback and those concerns. The conversation last night was in my own neighborhood, so I know about the concerns there. But what I often find is people's frustration and fear is based on what they see of homelessness today, which is what you described of walking through a neighborhood where you have these open air encampments, you have open air drug markets, you have unsanctioned, unsecure, unstable settings for people. We know those are dangerous. We agree with them. That's why we want to close those settings. We want to move people into settings that do have around-the-clock staff, that do have mental health support, that do have workforce training, and that do have addiction-based supports. Like, what we see from these sites is that they are night and day from what the current camping looks like, and that's the world we're pushing to. I think folks are going to be very pleased when they see the difference between what we have now and what we're going to build.
There are now 3 shelters that you have proposed, 3 hotel shelters within about a mile radius that you were talking about in the Central Park area on Quebec Street. Is that fair to group them all like that together?
You know, we're going to have sites around the city. We announced another hotel in Southeast Denver this week. We'll roll out another hotel on the west side tomorrow. And so we've continued to push for sites all around the city. Same with our migrant supports. Those are all also in neighborhoods all around the city. This one in Southeast was the first time there's ever been any sort of homeless support in Southeast Denver. That's a great step forward. So no, we think there are, and when you look at some of the existing shelter sites, some of the existing needs, most of that need right now is concentrated all in one neighborhood in downtown Denver, District 9 or District 10. And so what we know is the current real concentration of poverty has not worked. The ability to separate these services around the city, I think, is a much more successful approach. And this is only the first step of a 2-step process. We're going to be housing another 1,000 people next year, and so that's more and more sites to bring on. We have other sites still that we're developing right now that aren't yet prepared, that are in other neighborhoods we haven't been to yet. And so we've set a goal to have this be a shared commitment across the city, and we're on path to do that.
Right now it says, your dashboard says that 292 people have been counted on the House 1000 dashboard. We reached out to your administration. They tell us that 29 are no longer in housing, 29 of those 292. Why should you get credit towards that goal for housing people that aren't housed?
Yes, I mean, some of those people that are no longer housed have moved on to permanent housing. Some of those have reconnected with family or friends and or transitioned to other settings. And so I think for us, that's a very compelling statistic. That's 90+% of people that are still housed, 95% in some settings if you take the exits to housing. So that's far better than we thought we would do, honestly. Many places the retention data is 75% or 60%. So I think the 2 great pieces of data have been, first people said, well, will people even want to go to housing in the first place? Well, 100% of the people we've offered housing to in these encampments have all said yes. That's an amazing first data set.
It's still at 100%.
Still at 100%. They were at 90, 93, 95% that are still housed 3 months in, also a great sign. But of course, we're never going to be perfect. We know that people are in hard situations and they'll have additional needs. But that just allows us to keep focusing on more and more people we can bring off the streets and into housing. But we know it's the same thing with anyone that, if you have a friend or families that have been addicted, they don't always succeed at rehab the first time, or if you have folks with mental health needs, they don't always succeed at the first strategy. We knew that would happen, but we know we'll stay at it to be able to keep working with those folks until they succeed.
Is the city prepared to pay for indefinite housing at shelters for people experiencing homelessness?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I don't know that I've made that as clear, which is the purpose here is not at all indefinite. The purpose is that this should be a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 month transition period where someone gets off of the streets, gets housed and stabilized, gets mental health or addiction support if they need it, gets a workforce training, applies for a job, gets a job, works the first month or 2 months, saves up money to put to down payment, and then moves out to their own permanent housing unit. That was why we were excited. We announced 500 vouchers for permanent housing to move people out of these units and then into permanent housing. So the goal on all these is they should be temporary. We call them transitional housing because it's not meant to be your forever home. It's meant to be a place you get stable, you get your life back together, and then you get onto your own permanent unit.
You talk about 3, 4, 5 months that they might be in the traditional or transitional housing. Going back to the topic of migrants are kicked out of the shelters after 37 days if they're a family. Why is that fair?
Well, we think they're just different populations that have different needs. And right now, when we're talking about the population of folks that are unhoused, they have a very different history of experience and trauma. What I say is oftentimes people enter homelessness because of economic crisis, but they often get stuck there because of mental health challenges or addiction needs, and those require more significant levels of intervention and help to get people reacquainted. When you have someone who has just traveled 3,000 miles on their own by foot to get to a city because they are desperately ready to work, that person is in a very different situation where they're ready to get into housing and to work immediately. And we think really the only holdup for many of those families is federal work authorization. If they had work authorization today, they wouldn't probably need a night of shelter as migrants. And so we think that is equitable to focus on both, because as you know, equity is not always the same. It's a matter of what people's individual needs are, and the needs profiles are different.
Would you agree that even if they did, even if they are waiting for federal work authorization, it could work and don't have addiction or anything like that, they probably don't want to be sleeping on the streets either, though.
Oh yeah, I don't think anybody wants to be sleeping on the streets. I think many of those folks came to this country to seek the American dream because they weren't coming here asking for handouts. They weren't looking for charity or to be sustained as wards of the state. They were looking to come here and be able to work for themselves and support their families. That's what they want to do. That's what we want to help them do. And so I think they are very, very entrepreneurial and innovative and resourceful. We just got to get them access to the resources they need to be successful.
But to get to that level, they might have to sleep on the streets.
That's always possible. I mean, that's not our hope or desire, but can I promise that that will never happen? No, I couldn't do that. In the same way that many of them camped all the way up here in small towns and cities through Central America to get to the U.S., in which their lives were in much greater risk, which is why they wanted to get here, because they believed that they had a chance to pursue work and dreams here. And so we're going to do everything we can to get everybody off the streets, no matter how they got here or why they got here. But that's directly related to how many units we can bring on, how many neighborhoods we can enter into that partnership with, how many resources we have to do that. We also have to be mindful of what our total budget is. I mean, right now, we could spend at this path $60 to $100 million on our newcomers next year alone. That's twice the budget for homelessness. And so we know that we both want to be a welcoming city that is supportive and generous, and we also want to help people get quickly to self-sufficiency because we know that's what they want too.
You can't do everything that you want to do.
I'm trying to make everything that we can do possible, but there are limits. But I find those limits actually match our values, right? When I talk to migrants that have come here, no one would say to me, hey, can you put me up in a hotel in perpetuity so I don't have to work? That's what I came to America for. They'd say the opposite. They'd say, I busted my behind to walk 3,000 miles in burning heat to get my child a better chance at a different life, and all I want here is the chance to work and support myself. We don't bring them all that far so we can say, let's put you in a hotel and not let you work for 30 days. They are hungry to work, hungry to create opportunities for themselves. We just got to help get the barriers out of the way that are stopping them.
But to be fair, that could involve sleeping on the street in the middle of winter when it's 10 degrees outside.
Yeah, that is a reality for people across the city right now, and that's a reality for people across every major city in America right now.
That's not something that you say we need to change immediately.
I think it's something I feel like we do need to change immediately. That's why we started the whole effort around House 1000, is we want to be able to get people off the streets and into housing. That's why I've said.
But you're not prioritizing migrants for that.
No, we're prioritizing both. We're prioritizing people that are unhoused and all. We're not going into a tent and saying, show us your documentation papers to decide you get access to housing. We're moving people based on those encampments into housing, regardless of their status or their history. And so I think that is our focus. But what we know, this is why people thought we were crazy when we said we could try to end unsheltered chronic homelessness, but that's exactly what you described. We want no one to be stuck sleeping on the streets. And so that's what our target is, but we know we have to add units and add capacity, add resources, but I think those experiences right now have been different.
1 minute. Can we go a couple minutes since we started late? Let me ask you really quickly on stuff that's happened in the last couple of days. 260 people who are homeless have already died on Denver streets. 4 overdosed this weekend that presumably may have been experiencing homelessness. What can you do to stop that? I know you're focused on housing, but is housing everything?
Housing is the first step to stabilization. When I met with a woman who's the head of medicine at University of California, San Francisco, who does study on homelessness, and she said if you were to biologically engineer a drug to survive homelessness, it would be something that could help you stay awake all night so you don't get attacked. It would be something to help protect you from the cold, and it would be something to help dull your hunger. That's what methamphetamine and fentanyl do. They help people survive the experiences of this trauma. So we know we have folks that are struggling with that addiction, but they are struggling with that addiction in part because of the trauma of being outside in freezing weather. And so if we get them into housing, but housing that includes all those wraparound services, it's got to be both. It's got to be housing plus wraparound services. That is how we think people get stabilized, and we know they get stabilized to get their lives back together. So that both ends the experience of homelessness and can also end the experience of unsupported major addiction that can lead to death. We want to do both of those. And for folks that are struggling over and over again with those addiction needs, we want to get them into treatment as well.
If we're having this conversation 1 month from today, December 29th, we say, hey, you have 2 days to accomplish your goal. Where do you think you'll be 1 month from now?
I will be running around the city helping people get moved into housing up until the last minute because it's going to be cold and winter's coming. We don't want folks outside in that weather. And when I first thought about this effort, I called it Home for the Holidays because the idea was all of us want to be home for the holidays. We want to be back with family. We want to have someplace warm that you can feel safe, and we want everyone in Denver to have that experience. We're going to sprint as hard as we can to make sure that everyone in Denver has that opportunity, but we know we got work to do.
All right, my final question. How's your car?
We got it back, so we did get it back. It was actually my wife's car, and so I was in extra trouble because I managed to get my wife's car stolen. But she has recovered it. We have it back, and the Denver Auto Theft Team was a great resource.
A serious question on that note, though. Does the mayor have a responsibility to tell the people, hey, I was a victim of this crime. I am feeling what you are feeling. Do you have that responsibility to tell people?
I've shared it with people, so I've not been shy to share it. For me, it was a great lesson about what everyone in the city faces. I'd had a car stolen before, so when I was in the campaign trail, I talked about the experience of having a car stolen. So I think I know and live every part of the same stress the rest of the city has, and that's why we're working on a much broader rollout on our auto theft plan, which is about all the things we can do on prevention, intervention, and accountability. And so we've been working on that for the last 60 days, well before this happened to me. But we know how urgent of an issue this is in the city, and we are preparing to roll out a plan that will help all the residents of Denver, and hopefully me too.
Do you still have that blue and orange car?
That one I don't. That one got ridden until it died.
That's fine. Mayor Johnston, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you.
Of course.